Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. Like everybody else on YouTube, I got my iPhone 15 Pro Max yesterday, and I've been playing around with it now for the better part of 24 hours, and I thought I would give you some insights as to what I think of the phone so far. And we're going to dive into all of this in just a second, but I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for the phone with my own funds on release day. I didn't get an early review unit. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Apple, of course, is not sponsoring this video, nor is anyone reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what the new phone is all about. Now, the price point on the Pro version of the phone starts at $1,000 for the smaller version. This larger one starts at $1,200 and, of course, goes up from there based on the storage capacity. You can, of course, trade your phone in, and what I did was initially tried to buy the phone from Apple directly, which is what I usually do, and at the time that you set up that purchase, they also give you a trade-in estimate for your old phone. Unfortunately, though, Apple's order-taking system completely crashed on me, and I would have had to have waited until October to get my phone, yet my carrier, Verizon, actually had some phones available on release day. So I ordered it from there. They actually gave me more for the trade-in value. But one thing I missed, and thankfully I caught it before I sent my old phone back, is that they don't give you the trade value up front like Apple does. What they do instead is they amortize it over 36 months, and you're kind of locked into the carrier to realize all of the value of the phone that you traded in. It's a real ripoff. So be on the lookout for that. What I'm going to do instead is sell my phone to Gazelle, who offered me the same rate that Apple did. So I'm okay, at least insofar as being made whole on this deal. But unfortunately, Verizon is up to their usual tricks. So just be on the lookout for that. Now, I went again with the Pro Max here. This has a 6.7-inch display. The smaller phone is 6.1 inches. I haven't had a phone this large since the iPhone 7 Plus many years ago. And I went with the larger phone because, like the iPhone 7 Plus back in the day, it has a better, or maybe a more interesting, camera system than the smaller version of the phone. So the telephoto lens on this is a 5x zoom versus 3x on the smaller phone. And that gets you like a 120 millimeter equivalent for zooming in, which I thought might be useful for some of my video work. Size-wise, I'm really not too offended by the size of the phone. I remember when I got my 7 Plus, it felt too big to me. This one doesn't feel that big at all. It certainly feels a bit larger than what I had, but not considerably so. My thumb can reach across the screen most of the time, so I'm able to type on it one-handed. And although it's not as small as my iPhone 14 that I am trading in soon, what I do like about it is that it doesn't feel all that much larger. And I can actually live with this, and I'm actually enjoying the larger size here. And what was really interesting to me is that the phone, even though it's heavier, feels lighter to me. And I think it has to do with some of the materials and how they balance the weight out. So for example, my old Pro 14 here weighs 7.27 ounces or 206 grams. My Max is 7.81 ounces or 221 grams. So definitely heavier, but it feels lighter when I pick it up. And one of my viewers over on Mastodon pointed me at an article that you can find here on screen that talks about the fact that the inertia of picking up the phone, the moment of inertia, is what gives you the illusion of things being lighter because there's less density in the materials and the weight is spread out differently. So although these two phones are, one is heavier than the other here, this one feels a lot lighter. So overall, from the size standpoint, I don't regret going from the smaller phone to the larger one. And if this is how Apple's going to make these phones in the future, I'm probably going to stick to this. You'll also notice here the bezels are a lot thinner, and I think that little bit of reduction in width that they were able to achieve by that bezel reduction is making all the difference here. And it just shows you just how incremental these phone upgrades are these days, that they just make very small, subtle changes from one phone version to the next. We're not seeing the huge innovations that we used to see, but this feels like a really nice phone in the hand. It, of course, has titanium that wraps around it. Haven't seen too much fingerprints getting on the side here, but I guess at some point they will. But overall, a very nice fit and finish here. I don't have any of the blemishes that some people are reporting on Twitter. So my phone here came in very nice condition. Now we're going to spend the rest of the video talking about the notable differences on the 15 Pro versus the prior iterations of the iPhone. And of course, one of the biggest changes is that they swapped out the silent switch for a button. And by default, it will do what the switch does, which is that if you hold it down, it will toggle between silent and ring. But you can also go in and configure the button to do different things. By the way, a simple push here doesn't do anything. You have to hold it down in order for it to make that switch. Now, if you go into settings, what you're going to see is an option here for the action button. That's what they're calling it here. And by default, it's going to be silent mode, but you can scroll through a few other options here that you can have initiate. Another fun thing is that you can have it execute shortcuts. And what I did with my button was I had it activate the Tesla fart machine every time I held it down. My kids really love that. But you can, of course, have it do a whole bunch of different things if you have ever played around with Apple shortcuts, which, by the way, are very, very powerful ways to automate things between apps on your phone. And that might be the subject of a video in the future. So I kind of like what they're doing here, kind of expanding the use case for a control that many people weren't using. My issue with it, and I think this is very correctable, is that it only does one thing now. So you have to hold it down and have it do whatever it is you want it to do. And I think it might be cool if you could have it do something different if you double click it or triple click it, so you could add more functionality to that button just based on how you're interacting with it. And I would imagine in future firmware updates, or perhaps on the iPhone 16, they may decide to add some additional functionality there. I have reviewed phones from a little company called Unihertz over the years that are really fun little phones. They've got all sorts of different unique designs, and they've got a very similar button on their phones that they've had for many years, and you can have, I think, 3 or 4 different types of things fire off based on how you push the button. And I would love to see Apple do that here. I was kind of surprised, actually, that they only had one function that could be programmed to the button at the moment. Now, one of the big changes on the new phone is that they got rid of the Lightning connector and switched to USB Type-C. And on the Pro phones, you get a 10 gigabit USB-C port versus only a USB 2 speed port on the non-Pro phones. And what's nice about this port is that it actually works with docking stations. So I have attached this Vision Tech dock that, in full disclosure, came in free of charge from the company a little while back for review. And connected to that dock, I have Ethernet, I have an HDMI output, and I have an external solid-state drive. I also have power going into the dock that is passing through to the phone right now and is charging. And as you can see here, the video output is working, so I'm able to browse around my phone on a screen. Right now, it looks like it's outputting at 1080p at 60 frames per second, although I did read somewhere that it's capable of 4K, and I'll show you some more video output examples in a minute. Additionally, I can get access to that SSD that's plugged into it, so I can go ahead here and play a ProRes video that I recorded earlier, and I'll talk more about that in a second as well. So that seems to be working. And also, the Ethernet is working too. What I had to do, though, to get the Ethernet speed was to disable the Wi-Fi, basically switch the Wi-Fi off, because it looks like Wi-Fi, even when Ethernet is connected, is the higher priority network connection. But this does have gigabit Ethernet on board, and if we run a quick speed test out to Comcast here, you can see I'm getting pretty much the gigabit speeds that my internet service provides me. So altogether, it's kind of nice here to have a phone that kind of works like the rest of the phones in the industry. I did notice a little bit of a slower upstream on it, but it could be some competition on the USB bus here. But overall, it's nice to see that we're making progress on getting some standardization and less proprietary connectors on the iPhone side. Now, the quality of the video is substantially improved when you are outputting over HDMI, and that is because this is now using USB-C alt mode versus those expensive Lightning adapters that were used before. So if you have a USB-C to DisplayPort or HDMI cable, you don't even need an adapter. You can just plug that cable right in and get your video output going. And there's practically no input lag either, because you're pretty much outputting video the same way your laptop does. So all in, I think a very good upgrade here, thanks to moving over to USB Type-C for the port. Now, another cool feature of this phone, which I think is going to appeal to a lot of video professionals, is that you can now record ProRes video onto external media. The prior versions of the phone did support recording ProRes, but you had to record onto the phone itself, and you only had USB 2 speeds to copy the files off. Now you can record them directly to disk, and if your disk is fast enough, you can record 4K 60 onto the external drive and have what is essentially a lossless ProRes file on the drive that you can very quickly transfer to a PC for editing. So right now I've got this Crucial drive connected. We're going to be reviewing this soon. And in full disclosure, this came in from Crucial for review, free of charge. And if I hit the ProRes button here, you can now see that we've switched into an HDR mode. That's the mode that I have it set to right now. I can hit record, and we're actually recording now onto the Crucial drive and not onto my internal storage. And we're doing this at 4K 60 in HDR. And I'm going to let this go out to about 15 or 20 seconds or so here so you can see how big the file is when it's done. But again, I really like this ability to record onto external media. Unfortunately, it doesn't let you do it, though, with the compressed files, the native recording format. It's only for the ProRes stuff now. But I would imagine there's probably going to be some third-party app developer that figures out a way to get compressed video onto the disk as well. They do suggest, though, that your drive support 220 megabytes per second of bit rate in order to support this feature. I would imagine that this mode is probably eating up most of that bit rate right now at 4K 60, but going at 1080p likely will require less bit rate. So I do think it's feasible to use SD cards with a USB-C 3-speed adapter or your external SSDs here. And I'm sure we'll see some pretty cool rigs when some of those third-party hardware manufacturers get going here. Let's take a look now and see how large this now 1-minute file is. So let me pull up that and see how much disk space we needed for this recording. So 1 minute and 10 seconds took up about 15.36 gigabytes here on the drive. And this was just not feasible on the prior iPhone. So it's nice to see now that they've provided this option with the faster port. Now you can set up a couple of different ProRes formats to record with. So as I mentioned, I was doing HDR, but if you go into the camera settings and go to formats, you can change it to an SDR, which is just standard dynamic range, and you can also put it in the log format, and then when you bring it into edit, you can color grade it and get things where you want it to be. And for this reason, I actually think the iPhone Pro 15 is actually a pretty good bargain for professional video creators because you've got 3 different lenses on the back at different focal lengths. You also have the front camera, and you can record ProRes here, ProRes with a log, for very little money when you think about it compared to what a Blackmagic camera would cost with all the different lenses that you would have to buy for it. Certainly the sensor here is smaller. There's definitely arguments to be made to purchase higher end gear, but you've got an awesome camera system here that'll basically dump out lossless video now to an external drive for $1,200. That is a pretty good value in the professional video space. Let's take a look at some of the things I noticed on the camera system now. Now, one of the things that I've always liked about my iPhone are the live photos, where in addition to taking a picture, it records a short video with sound so you can get the context of the photo that you were taking. And it really makes my family photos a lot more fun because you can kind of get a sense of the ambiance that was going on when that picture was taken. The problem, though, is that you always had to choose between this and portrait mode. But now what's happening is that if the phone detects a person or a pet in the picture, it will allow you to add the portrait mode later using the same depth data that it collects in portrait mode. So if I tap up here, I can actually turn portrait on, and now you'll get some of that bokeh in the background. I can even go in here and adjust the depth further, so I can go and make the background even blurrier or less blurrier. And this was just from a regular picture that I took, which I really like quite a bit. So you have kind of the best of both worlds now in that you can get your portrait mode, but also retain that data. Additionally, it will recognize stuff with its AI. So for example, this is a picture of my dog, who's a Siberian Husky. It did recognize the breed here successfully. I can tap on this and get pictures from the web, but also search my own photo album for more photos of dogs like that. Out in my garden the other day, I've been keeping track of this pepper that I'm growing. I've been trying to get bell peppers all season and haven't been very successful. But if I hit the button here, it actually detected that it's a pepper. So you can point this at plants and give it the ability to recognize what you're looking at there. So lots of neat stuff. I think this AI recognition is part of iOS in general, but this ability now to add portrait mode to regular photos, I believe, is unique to the iPhone 15. Now, as far as image quality is concerned, everything looks great as usual. I am sure there are reviewers that can pick through some of the nuances between the 14 and the 15, but I think it looks great here, especially out of the main camera where it pulls out a ton of detail here and you get great looking pictures without having to do a lot of effort. But I'd have a hard time telling the difference, to be honest with you, between the 14 and the 15, but I'm sure there are improvements they've made along the way. The bigger change, though, is what they've done on the camera system as a whole. So on the larger phone, you now have a 5x lens, which I'll show you some more examples of in a minute, in addition to the ultra wide. And then because they have a larger sensor now, they've got a couple of digital zoom options. So if you tap on the 1X here, you get a little bit of a zoom there with a virtual 28 millimeter. There's also a 35 millimeter, and then you've got the 2X here. But basically the optics of the lens is on the 1 setting and the 5 and the 0.5. Everything else is a digital zoom, but they all look pretty good, and Apple certainly does a nice job making digital zooms look more organic, but they're still digital. But one of the nice things about the new camera system is that you can switch between the lenses at 4K 60 while you're recording, as you can see here. So we went from the ultra wide to the 1 to the 5, and you can basically switch between them at will here. And it does a pretty nice transition between the lenses. It matches color up pretty nicely. There's a little bit of a shift when you get from one lens to the other, but by and large, if you were doing some B-roll and needed to very quickly get in on something, you can do that now without resorting to a digital zoom. Now the 5X lens does a pretty nice job with video. What I like most about it is that it has a very nice natural bokeh, as you can see there, without the need to turn on that digital cinematic mode. I do wish its detail was a little better. You do need a lot of light to get the most out of that 5X lens. So you can see here inside with the window behind me kind of lighting the scene, the image is a lot noisier. You'll see similar issues when you're taking still photos. So although you got a nice natural bokeh here, you're going to need to light the scene up a lot to get the most out of that image sensor. And when you're in really dark conditions here, as you can see, it doesn't look so great at all. So it's nice to have that additional zoom, but I think they do need to work on the image processing a bit here to get more out of it, because right now, although it's got some nice functions to it, the image quality, especially in lower light, is not so good, and the detail needs to be a bit better. But what is clear is that my dog definitely needs a good brushing as she's blowing out her coat ahead of winter. One last thing to talk about, and that is the performance of this new phone versus some others. I ran the 3D Mark Wildlife Benchmark test, actually two variants of that test, the Extreme and the regular. And as you can see here, we're looking at about a 22% performance boost over the iPhone 14 Pro when it comes to gaming. And we're actually very close to the MacBook Air M1. So it's conceivable that you could probably run a Mac on the phone. And that's one of my big wish list items, is for Apple to turn the iPhone into a Mac when it's docked. We're not quite there yet, but the performance, at least on this test, certainly indicates that we're getting closer to that mark. But there's always a caveat, and that has to do with the fact that there is a lot of throttling that you're going to experience when you put the phone under load. So it's going to heat up quite a bit when you're running one of these benchmarks, and when you run a stress test like I did, which runs this benchmark over and over again over the course of 20 minutes, you see an almost immediate drop in performance, and you lose about 37% of that performance right out of the gate. So it's able to do some cool stuff in very bursty kinds of activities, but when you're really stressing out the GPU, as you can see here, you're going to be running at a much lower performance level due to all of that throttling that's going on. So I'm not sure how you rectify that issue. I'm sure even throttled, this phone is faster than the prior ones, but there's a substantial amount of performance that you lose when you put the phone under heavy sustained load. Now, as far as battery life is concerned, the battery life is better on this phone versus my other one, but as I mentioned in a prior video, my other phone's battery health degraded quite a bit as we were getting into the last 2 or 3 months here. So it's really not something I'm going to give a determination on just yet, because we're on day 2 of its battery. And as you can see, my battery capacity right now and my battery health screen is at 100%, which is where it should be on the second day of ownership. And it certainly feels a lot better than what I had on my iPhone 14 Pro. But as I noted, over the last couple of months, the Pro's battery longevity has tailed off quite a bit as it goes through charge cycles. Now, Apple says that your battery should retain about 80% of its maximum capacity after 500 charge cycles. if your battery is at that level, they won't replace it under warranty. But they never gave you an option for seeing what the battery cycle count was so that you could determine whether or not you had an issue. You had to bring the phone into the store or go through a complicated process to pull its logs out to get the number. On the new phones, they now have a section in your About screen in the settings where it will give you the battery cycle counts. As you can see, I am at 1 here, and I will be keeping an eye on that number and the battery health number as we work our way through the life cycle of my new phone here. Oddly, they don't put that cycle number on the battery health screen. They just don't make it easy for people to verify that their phone is working properly. So I'm hoping in future editions of the phone, they put that cycle count on this screen, because right now you have to go into the About section off of your General Settings tab to get that number. Overall, though, I am pleased with my new phone. It doesn't feel all that groundbreaking versus the last one, but that's been true of every iPhone iteration probably over the last 6 or 7 years at this point. It is an improvement, not a huge one. I like the 5x lens, but I was a bit disappointed with its low light performance. I'm hoping that they might be able to squeeze a little bit more out of it with some firmware updates. I also want that button to be more functional here on the side with some additional ways that you can interact with it. But overall, I'm happy with it. I'm actually surprised that I don't mind having the bigger phone now. It feels really nice in my hand. And as most Apple products are, it's pretty nicely constructed here, and I've got no other complaints with it. I'll keep you posted as my experience with this phone continues. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Logic KGR, Tom Albrecht, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.